Still in mourning, the businessman returned home earlier than usual and was surprised by the sound of laughter, the smell of chocolate, and genuine joy coming from the kitchen. As he crossed the doorway, he found his fiancée and the triplets covered in flour, immersed in a sweet afternoon filled with affection. In that moment, he realized that love had rebuilt what pain had nearly destroyed. But first, we need to understand how this story came to be. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and let us know what city you're watching from. Now, on with the story. The aroma of vanilla and caramelized sugar filled every corner of that simple house in Queens, New York. It was a scent that clung to the curtains, permeated the clothes, and became part of the very identity of that home. On Saturday mornings, when the sun was still struggling to break through the small windows, Claire was already on her feet, her hands dusted with flour, her hair thrown up in a messy bun, and that focused look of someone who turned the basic into the extraordinary. She didn't have a degree, had never attended culinary school, but she possessed something no course could teach, the gift of putting love into every recipe. By her side, always present even when he was away, was Michael, a man of average height with hands calloused from work and a smile that could disarm even the most skeptical customer. He would wake up before her, make the coffee, organize the packaging, and head out with his canvas bag full of cakes, cookies, and cream-filled donuts. He went door to door to local businesses, offering samples, telling the story of those recipes with a contagious enthusiasm. Michael believed, with an unshakable faith, that Claire's talent deserved to be recognized far beyond those narrow streets. The two had met when they were young, at a block party where she sold her first homemade sweets, and he bought them all, just to have an excuse to talk to her. Claire was only 18, with long dark hair, her hands always smelling of cinnamon. Michael, 2 years older, worked as a delivery driver for a distributor, but dreamed of something bigger. That June afternoon, he tasted one of the fudge brownies she had made and knew, with an inexplicable certainty, that this woman would change his life. He wasn't wrong. They dated for 2 years, a time marked by dates in the park, letters written on lined paper, and whispered plans for the future. Michael saved every penny. Claire sold her sweets at farmers' markets and parties, and together they dreamed of the day they could start something of their own. They had a simple wedding, a small ceremony at the local church with just 20 guests, and a 3-tiered cake that the bride herself had made. Their honeymoon was a weekend at a cousin's place upstate, but for them it was perfect. They returned and rented a small 1-bedroom in an old apartment building. It was cramped, the walls were damp, and the bathroom was shared with other tenants. But it was theirs. Claire set up her first workspace there, a small table against the wall, shelves improvised with planks and bricks, and utensils bought one by one. Michael kept his full-time job, but on weekends he became the salesman for his wife's sweets. They built a life based on partnership, hard work, and shared dreams. They didn't have much, but they had enough, and when the children arrived, that small universe gained even more meaning. Daniel was born first, a boy with observant eyes who, even as a baby, seemed to watch everything with an unusual seriousness. Claire used to say he was born an old soul, always so thoughtful, so careful. From a young age, he organized his toys in perfect rows, ate without making a mess, and slept through the night without waking. He was an easy child who demanded little and offered much. 3 years later, Sarah arrived, all energy and curiosity, the complete opposite of her brother. She was born screaming and never stopped expressing herself since, always with her hands where they shouldn't be, always with questions no one could answer, always testing limits and inventing games. If Daniel was the calm, Sarah was the storm. But a sweet storm, full of laughter and spontaneous hugs. The two grew up among mixing bowls, ovens, and stories told to the sound of a beeping timer. Their childhood didn't have expensive video games or trips to faraway beaches, but it had something many children would never know: the feeling of belonging to something bigger, of being part of a daily construction, of understanding from an early age that achievements require effort. They would come home from school and do their homework at the kitchen table while Claire worked. On weekends, they helped with simple tasks, separating cupcake liners, counting how many sweets fit on each tray, wrapping them in cellophane with colorful ribbons. It was work, but it was also time together. It was learning, it was family. Daniel learned early on to help his father. At just 8 years old, he was already accompanying Michael on some nearby deliveries, carrying small boxes, observing the negotiations, understanding that every sale was a victory won with patience and persistence. He saw his father get rejected countless times, hear polite no's and some not-so-polite ones, but never give up. That shaped something profound in the boy, the resilience of someone who knows the road is long but worth it. Sarah, on the other hand, was fascinated by the magic that happened inside the kitchen. She would climb on a stool to reach the sink, wash the bowls with excessive care, ask to stir the batter, want to know why the cake rose, why the sugar melted, why some cookies were crispier than others. Claire answered with patience, teaching not just techniques, but a philosophy. To cook was to care, to offer comfort, to create memories that would last forever. The years passed, and the routine adjusted. What started as a way to supplement their income became the family's main livelihood. The orders increased. The house could no longer handle the production. It was then that Michael made the riskiest decision of his life, to rent a small commercial space on the neighborhood's main avenue. Claire was terrified. The bills were already tight. How could they afford rent? But Michael held her hands, looked deep into her eyes, and said something she would never forget. "Have faith in us." The space was tiny, almost a hallway with a display window in the front and an oven in the back. The walls needed painting, the ceramic floor had some broken tiles, and the electrical wiring was shoddy. But Michael saw potential where others saw only problems. He did most of the renovation himself, working nights and weekends with help from friends who were paid in lunches and beers. Claire cleaned, organized, and decorated with the little they had. Simple curtains she sewed herself, wooden shelves varnished by her brother-in-law, a hand-painted sign by a neighbor who was an artist, but it was theirs. Or at least it would be for 30 days if they couldn't make the next month's rent. In the first few days, almost no one came in. Michael stood at the door, offering free samples, explaining that these were homemade products, made with select ingredients and a lot of love. Some people walked right by, too busy. Others accepted out of politeness, tasted, complimented, but didn't return. Few actually bought anything. There were nights when Claire would cry softly into her pillow, convinced they would lose everything. Michael would hold her. Hand and repeat. "We just need one chance, just one person to believe in us." It was Mrs. Miller, the neighbor from the corner, who changed everything. She was a widow in her 70s, who lived alone with 3 cats and a strict routine. She had passed by the shop several times without entering, just observing with the suspicious gaze of someone who had seen many businesses open and close on that same street. But one Saturday morning, she came in. She said she needed a cake for her granddaughter's birthday. Nothing too elaborate, just simple and delicious. Claire suggested the chocolate cake with fudge filling, one of her specialties. Mrs. Miller ordered it somewhat skeptically. On the day of the pickup, the old woman arrived early, inspected the cake from all angles, asked about the ingredients, and checked if it was well packaged. Michael, ever patient, answered everything with a good attitude. She took it, and at that moment, they thought they would never see her again. But on Monday, Mrs. Miller returned. And she wasn't alone. She brought her daughter, her granddaughter, and 3 neighbors. They all wanted to try that wonderful cake. They said they had never eaten anything so delicious that it tasted like it was made with love, that Mrs. Miller hadn't stopped talking about her discovery. They ordered cakes for their own parties, bought brownies as gifts, and took cookies home to try. The orders started pouring in. Birthday parties, simple weddings, baptism celebrations, baby showers, office parties. The small shop started to get busy. Soon Claire needed help. They hired Maria, a shy young woman from a small town who had come to New York looking for a better life, and found her first real chance in the small bakery. Maria was insecure. Her hands trembled when handling the more expensive ingredients, and she was afraid of making a mistake and being fired. She came from a small village in Honduras, where she had worked in the fields since she was a child. The city scared her. There were too many streets, the pace was too fast. She had arrived with just one suitcase of clothes and the address of a distant cousin who barely welcomed her. She needed a job urgently, sleeping in a tiny room shared with 4 other young women. When Claire hired her, it was the first time in months that someone had looked at her and seen potential, not just another desperate immigrant. But Claire saw in her the same desire to learn that she herself had had years ago. She taught with infinite patience, showing each technique 3, 4, 5 times if necessary. She corrected without humiliating, praised every small progress, always paid on time, and treated her with dignity. Over time, Maria blossomed. Her trembling hands became steady. Her whispered voice gained confidence. She became an essential part of the team, someone Claire could trust completely. Years later, when Maria managed to bring her mother and younger siblings to New York, she cried in Claire's arms, thanking her for the chance she had been given. That bakery didn't just change the flavor of the neighborhood's parties, it changed real lives, one at a time. The business grew slowly, but it grew. There was no sudden explosion, no extraordinary luck. It was a daily achievement, brick by brick, customer by customer. And as the bakery established itself, Daniel and Sarah grew up with it. Now teenagers, each was beginning to forge their own path, but they were always connected to that vanilla scent that defined who they were. Daniel, now 16, took on greater responsibilities. He accompanied his father to meetings with suppliers, learned about costs, profit margins, and negotiation. He had a notebook where he wrote everything down, did the math, and thought about expansion strategies. Michael watched his son with pride and a certain amazement. The boy thought big, saw possibilities that he himself had never considered. Sarah, at 13, was already creating her own recipes. She tested unusual combinations, revived flavors her mother mentioned from her own childhood in rural Pennsylvania, and invented fillings that surprised even the most traditional customers. She had a special intuition, a sensitivity to understand what people were looking for when they bought a sweet. It wasn't just flavor, it was nostalgia, it was comfort, it was the feeling of being welcomed. One Sunday afternoon, with the shop closed and the family gathered in the small living room, Michael made a proposal that left everyone silent. He had found a larger space, in a better location, with enough room to expand production and even create a small area for customers to eat in. It was a high-stakes bet, a huge risk. It would mean alone, sleepless nights, constant pressure. But it would also mean growth, recognition, the chance to turn that dream into something solid. Claire took a deep breath. She looked at her children, who were waiting for her answer with anticipation. She looked at Michael's calloused hands, at the walls of that simple house that had sheltered them for so many years, at the life they had built together. And then, with a firm but emotional voice, she said, "Let's do it." The move to the new location was a whirlwind. Renovations, buying better equipment, hiring more staff, creating a more elaborate menu. Maria now coordinated a small team. Daniel, at just 17, took over the administrative side with his father. Sarah dived headfirst into creating new products, transforming the bakery into a place that blended tradition and innovation. The first few months were filled with constant tension. The bills were tight, the loan interest was daunting, and there were days when Michael would wake up in the middle of the night with his heart racing, questioning if he had made the right choice. But gradually, the customer base solidified. Word of mouth worked its magic once again. Small articles on local blogs began to mention the bakery. Lines formed on weekends. By the time Daniel turned 22, he was an official partner in the business. Not because it was handed to him, but because he had earned it. He had streamlined processes, modernized management, created strategic partnerships with suppliers, and expanded the distribution network. His business acumen, combined with the heart of the enterprise that Claire and Michael had built, resulted in a perfect blend of efficiency and affection. Sarah, at 19, was the creative soul. She traveled to learn new techniques, took courses, and brought back inspiration from other places, but she never lost the essence. Every recipe had to tell a story, evoke an emotion, create a memory. Her cakes weren't just beautiful, they were complete sensory experiences. It was around this time that she met Philip. He was an architect, worked in a nearby office, and became a frequent customer. He always ordered the same thing, an espresso and a slice of carrot cake with chocolate frosting. Sarah noticed his routine even before they noticed each other. Until one day, when she personally brought his order to the table, their eyes met differently. It wasn't love at first sight, it was recognition, as if somehow they already knew each other. Their relationship started slowly, with conversations after work, walks through the neighborhood, and simple dinners. Philip was kind, thoughtful, and respectful. He was genuinely interested in the family's story, listened to Sarah talk for hours about recipes, and understood the importance of that legacy. And when, 2 years later, he proposed to her during a Sunday lunch at her parents' house, no one was surprised. It was as if it was already written. The wedding was simple, held in the same church where Claire and Michael had married decades before. The reception took place in the hall next to the bakery, decorated with simplicity and good taste. The sweets, of course, were all made by Sarah herself, with help from her mother and the team. It was a celebration of love, but also of achievements, of a journey, of family. Months later, the news that would change everything. Sarah was pregnant, and not with one baby, but 3. Triplets. The entire family was ecstatic. Claire cried with joy, Michael handed out sweets to all the neighbors, and Daniel was already planning how to adjust his schedule to help his sister. Philip, caught between shock and happiness, promised to be the best possible father to the 3 lives that were on their way. The pregnancy was challenging. Sarah had to temporarily step back from the bakery, rest more, and take extra care of herself. But she followed everything from home, gave her input over the phone, and created recipes in her imagination that she jotted down in a notebook to test later. And when the 3 boys were born, healthy and loud, it was as if the entire family was reborn along with them. Peter, Caleb, and Lucas. 3 simple names, 3 personalities that were already taking shape in the first few months. Peter was calm, observant. Caleb, restless, always on the move. Lucas, the middle one in size but the most sensitive of all, cried more, needed more cuddling, and clung to Sarah the most. The young family's home became an organized chaos, full of diapers, bottles, sleepless nights, and a messy kind of happiness. Meanwhile, Daniel continued on his own journey. Focused and disciplined, he built a solid career and took the family business to heights no one had ever imagined possible. 3 new locations were opened in different parts of New York. The brand began to be recognized not just for its taste but for the story behind it. Major articles appeared, awards were received, and expansion proposals came in constantly. But even with all the success, Daniel felt that something was missing. He wasn't unhappy, but he sensed an absence. He saw his sister's chaotic joy with the triplets. He saw the companionship of his parents who continued to work side by side after so many years, and he wished for something similar for himself. Until at a trade show in Philadelphia, he met Amanda. She wasn't in the food industry. She worked in education, coordinating social projects in underserved communities, and had a serene gaze and a calm voice that contrasted with the fast pace of Daniel's world. They talked by chance, in line for coffee, and that casual conversation stretched for hours. They exchanged numbers, started talking daily, and when they finally met again in New York, they both knew this was different. Amanda was everything Daniel didn't know he needed. She made him slow down, question his priorities, and look beyond the numbers and targets. And he fascinated her with his stories of perseverance, with the journey of that simple family who built an empire of affection. The relationship grew steadily, without rush but without hesitation. When Daniel brought her to meet the family, Sarah was the first to approve. There was something genuine about Amanda, a natural empathy that couldn't be faked. The triplets, now almost 2 and masters at testing any adult's patience, clung to her instantly. Amanda played on the floor with them, didn't mind getting her clothes dirty, and laughed naturally at their antics. Claire watched it all with the experienced eye of someone who knows people. She approved. Michael, always more outgoing, already treated her like a daughter. The family was growing, strengthening, renewing itself. And the bakery, now with 5 locations, continued to be the heart of it all, the place where everything began and where everyone always returned. The following years were ones of happy stability. The triplets grew up healthy, full of personality. Peter was the natural leader, organizing games, protecting his brothers. Caleb was the adventurer, always getting into trouble, always testing limits. Lucas was the sensitive one who observed everything, who showed the most affection. Sarah and Philip were dedicated, tired, but completely fulfilled parents. Daniel and Amanda made their union official in an intimate ceremony with only close family. They didn't want a big fuss, just to celebrate their commitment with those who truly mattered. Amanda integrated completely into the family dynamic, participating in Sunday lunches, helping Claire in the kitchen when she could, and listening to Michael's old stories with genuine interest. Life followed its rhythm, each person on their own journey, but all connected by those invisible bonds that only true families possess. There were future plans, shared dreams, and a certainty about the path they were walking together. Until everything changed on a sunny Thursday afternoon, when an unexpected phone call made everyone's world collapse. Daniel was in a meeting when his cell phone vibrated for the third consecutive time. Normally, he would have ignored it. Meetings were sacred. He had learned that from his father. When someone gives you their time, you repay it with your full attention. But something about the insistence bothered him. It was an unknown number, but the kind of persistence that usually announces news that can't wait. He excused himself, stepped out of the glass-walled conference room, and took a deep breath, preparing to solve whatever problem had arisen. Maybe a supplier with an urgent issue, maybe one of the stores with an emergency. He answered with his usual professional tone. On the other end of the line, the trembling voice of a state trooper changed everything in seconds. The words came in fragments. "We regret to inform you. Accident in the Catskills, adverse weather conditions, a dangerous curve, did not survive." Sarah and Philip had left for a weekend in the mountains, a trip planned for months, a much-needed break from the hustle of life with the triplets. They deserved that time alone. They had left the boys with their grandparents, promising to be back Sunday night with gifts and stories. But the winding road, the sudden rain that turned asphalt to ice, a moment of carelessness or bad luck, and now there was only absence. Silence. A void impossible to name, impossible to process, impossible to accept. Daniel couldn't process it immediately. The words entered his ears, but seemed to find no place in his mind. He mechanically repeated the information the trooper provided, as if taking notes for a regular meeting. Location of the accident, referral hospital, insurance contact. He asked him to repeat it, as if hearing it again could change the outcome. Maybe there was a mistake. Maybe it was other people with similar names. But there was no mistake. The documents, the license plates, it all matched. It didn't change. He jotted down mechanical information, addresses, procedures, necessary documents. He thanked him with an automatic voice, as if ending a common work call. He hung up. He stood there in the hallway, his phone still in his hand, staring at nothing. His legs felt like they had forgotten how to support his body. Someone passed by, a colleague who tried to say something about the meeting, but he didn't hear. How could he say out loud something he didn't even believe himself? How could he turn those words into sound, making them real, final, irrevocable? The next call was to his parents. Claire answered with her usual cheerful tone, asking if he would be joining them for lunch. Daniel took a deep breath, trying to find words that wouldn't hurt so much, but no such words existed. He just said they needed to be together, that he was on his way, that it was urgent. His tone gave everything away. Claire didn't ask any more questions, just said they would be waiting. When he arrived at his parents' house, Amanda was already there. She had sensed something in his phone call, dropped everything, and rushed over to be with him. Michael was sitting in the living room armchair, his hands clasped in his lap, his gaze lost. Claire was pacing back and forth in the kitchen, not doing anything, just walking. Daniel walked in, closed the door behind him, and before he could open his mouth, his eyes filled with tears. It was Amanda who held him, who made him sit down, who urged him to be calm even though she herself was trembling. He told them everything he knew, which was almost nothing. The accident, the confirmation, the irreversible absence. Claire let out a sound that wasn't a cry, not a scream, but something beyond, a pain that doesn't fit into known sounds. Michael remained motionless, as if any movement could make it more real. Amanda held Daniel's hand tightly, trying to be an anchor in a moment when everything was falling apart. The following days were a hazy blur of bureaucratic arrangements, difficult phone calls and visits from people offering condolences that offered no comfort. The bakery temporarily closed its doors. Maria and the other employees handled everything with discretion and respect. Close friends took turns bringing food that no one ate. Sarah and Philip's apartment remained untouched, waiting for owners who would not return. And there were the boys, Peter, Caleb, and Lucas. 3 5-year-old children who didn't understand why they had been at their grandparents' house for so many days, why everyone was crying so much, why so many people were coming and going with such sad expressions, why Mommy and Daddy hadn't come to pick them up, as they had promised. Claire tried to maintain their routine with an almost desperate dedication, as if normalcy could protect them from the truth. She prepared their meals at the same times, gave them baths with the same tenderness, brushed their teeth singing the same silly songs Sarah used to sing. She told them stories before bed, each one's favorite, trying to imitate the voices her daughter made for each character. But at night, when they thought she couldn't hear, the 3 of them would talk among themselves with that childlike logic, trying to understand the impossible. Peter, the oldest, by 3 minutes would say that maybe Mommy and Daddy were lost in the mountains, that they would be back soon. Caleb insisted they had gone to buy a very special present, and that's why they were taking so long. Lucas, always the most sensitive, just cried softly and asked for his mom. They sensed something, a change in the air, a sadness that permeated everything, even if they didn't fully understand it. It was on one of those nights, after the children had finally fallen asleep, exhausted from asking so many questions, that Daniel made the decision that would change his life forever. He was on the porch with Amanda, looking out at the city lights, each lost in heavy thoughts. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was necessary. Until he spoke, his voice hoarse from crying, "I'm going to take care of them." Amanda turned to face him. Daniel continued, as if he needed to say it all before his courage failed him. "They're all that's left of her. I can't let them go just anywhere. Sarah would have trusted me. I know she would have. They'll live with me. I'll be responsible for them. I'll do everything she would have done." He expected questions, expected fear, expected Amanda to say it was crazy, that he had no experience, that it was too soon for such a drastic decision. But she just moved closer, held his face in both her hands, and said firmly, "We're going to take care of them." Daniel blinked, confused. Amanda repeated more slowly, "We, together. You're not doing this alone because you're not alone. Those boys need a family, and we will be that family." The tears returned, but this time they were different. They carried pain, but also something that felt like hope. In the following days, Daniel talked to his parents about the decision. Claire and Michael were exhausted, still submerged in their own grief, but they supported him immediately. Of course they did. It was what Sarah would have wanted. Legal arrangements were made, documents were signed, and proceedings were initiated. And when everything was in motion, the hardest moment arrived, telling the boys. Claire suggested they do it together, all the adults present, so the boys would feel secure. They called the 3 of them into the living room and sat on the floor in a circle. Peter, always the most observant, sensed that something serious was happening. Caleb tried to run off to play, but Peter held him back. Lucas already had tears in his eyes before a single word was spoken. It was Amanda who began to speak. She used simple, honest words without any white lies. She explained that Mommy and Daddy had gone to a place very far away, a place they couldn't come back from, but that they would always be in everyone's hearts, that the boys had done nothing wrong, that they were loved very much and that they would continue to be loved very much. Peter asked when they would be back. Amanda took a deep breath and told the truth. "They're not coming back, sweetie, but you will never be alone." Daniel then explained that they were going to come live with him and Aunt Amanda, that they would have a new room, that they would see their grandparents every day, that everything would be okay, even though it would be different. Caleb, who rarely stayed still, began to cry uncontrollably. Peter held his brother's hands, trying to be strong as he always did. Lucas simply threw himself into Claire's lap and cried until he had no tears left. The move happened 2 weeks later. Daniel and Amanda's apartment was adapted in a hurry, but with the utmost care. One room was completely transformed into a children's bedroom, with 3 beds arranged in a triangle, each with bedding in the boys' favorite colors: blue for Peter, green for Caleb, red for Lucas. Shelves were installed along the walls, filled with toys carefully brought from their old home. Every teddy bear, every toy car, every book. Amanda made sure to also bring the drawings that had been stuck to the fridge. In the old apartment, the family photos in colorful frames, the mobile that spun above Lucas's bed. Drawings on the walls that Sarah had made with the boys were photographed, printed, and replicated. Nothing was left behind. Amanda ensured that each of them brought their favorite objects, their blankets that smelled like home, their worn-out pillows, their tangible memories of a home that no longer existed but needed to continue existing within them somehow. The first few days in the new house were confusing and quiet. The boys moved as a unit, always together, looking at everything with suspicion. They didn't throw tantrums. They didn't complain, which was even more worrying. It was as if they were waiting for someone to tell them it was all temporary, that they would soon be going back to their real home. Amanda didn't try to be their mother. She knew it would be a mistake to try to replace Sarah, that it would be disrespectful to her memory and cruel to the children. But she offered her presence. She woke up with them, prepared breakfast, took them to school, picked them up, and helped with homework. At night, when Daniel came home from meetings and business trips, she would tell him how the day had been, what each of them had said, the small steps forward or backward. Daniel tried to be present whenever possible, but the business demanded his attention. The 5 bakery locations needed management, suppliers demanded decisions, and employees had questions. He divided his time between meetings during the day and bedtime stories at night. He felt inadequate, unprepared. Sarah had made it all look so natural, and he was just trying not to let everything fall apart. It was Amanda who noticed it first. The boys weren't playing anymore. They went to school, did their chores, ate dinner, and slept. But they didn't run through the house, didn't fight over toys, didn't laugh out loud like children should. They were operating on autopilot, surviving but not living. She mentioned it to Daniel one night, worried. He agreed that he had noticed it too, but he didn't know what to do. It was Claire who gave them the suggestion. Bring them to the bakery on Saturdays, let them help in the kitchen, get their hands dirty with dough, make a mess. Sarah grew up that way, and so did you. Daniel, that place has happy memories, it smells like home. Maybe it will help. Daniel hesitated. He didn't want to force anything, but Amanda thought it was worth a try. On the first Saturday, they took the 3 of them to the main location, the one in the neighborhood where it all began. Maria greeted them with tight hugs. Claire was already there, with children's aprons she had specially sewn. Michael had set up a small workbench at their height. The boys entered hesitantly but curiously. Claire suggested they make cookies, something simple that couldn't go too wrong. She showed them the ingredients, explaining each step with patience. Peter was the first to touch the dough, hesitant. Caleb soon got covered in flour, and finally, cracked a small smile. Lucas stayed close to Claire the whole time, holding her hand between steps. It wasn't an instant miracle. There was no magical transformation, but it was a start. Small, timid, but a start. That afternoon, for the first time in weeks, the boys seemed like children again, and when they went home, each carrying a small box of the cookies they had made, Peter commented softly that it had been fun. It wasn't much, but it was something. Saturdays at the bakery became a routine. Each week they became a little more relaxed, a little more at ease. Amanda started participating too, learning recipes, asking questions, genuinely getting involved in the universe that was so important to the family. If you were in Daniel and Amanda's shoes, how would you have helped the children overcome such a difficult time? Tell us in the comments. Months passed. The grief didn't disappear, but it changed shape. It ceased to be that sharp, constant pain and became a sadness that came in waves. Usually when least expected, the boys still asked about their mother, still had nightmares, still cried because they missed her. But they also started playing again, fighting with each other, complaining about food, and getting into mischief. Signs of life returning. Amanda noticed that Caleb had a talent for decorating. He would spend hours arranging frosting in elaborate shapes, creating designs on cakes with a concentration impressive for a 5-year-old. Peter, the leader, liked the organizational part, separating ingredients, checking quantities, following recipes to the letter. Lucas, the most sensitive, loved the tasting part. He had a refined palate, could identify spices, and suggested combinations. Each one was finding his place in that sweet universe that connected them to their mother. Daniel had to make adjustments in his career. He turned down long trips, delegated more responsibilities, and learned that not everything required his presence. The company continued to grow, but now he had different priorities. He still worked a lot, but he always had dinner at home, always read stories before bed, and was always present on weekends. One Tuesday morning, almost 8 months after the tragedy, something changed. Daniel woke up early for an important meeting in Philadelphia. It was just a day trip. He would be back at night. He said goodbye to Amanda and the boys while they were still in bed, kissed each of them, and promised to bring back surprises. But the meeting ended earlier than expected. The supplier was direct. The negotiations went smoothly, and by 3 in the afternoon, Daniel was already in the car heading back to New York. He decided not to call ahead. He wanted to surprise them, maybe get home in time to pick the boys up from school. He arrived home around 5, a time he would normally be stuck in traffic or in another meeting. He opened the door slowly, hearing voices coming from the kitchen. Cheerful voices, loud laughter, the clatter of dishes. He walked toward the sound, curious. As he stepped through the kitchen doorway, the scene completely froze him. There, in the middle of that beautiful mess, was Amanda. Her hair was in a messy bun, her face smudged with flour, her apron stained with chocolate. Surrounding her were Peter, Caleb, and Lucas. All of them were dirty too, all laughing, all completely immersed in the moment. The counter was covered with bowls, pans, and scattered ingredients. They were making cakes. The same cakes Sarah used to make using the recipes Claire had taught them, carrying on that legacy of love. Peter was explaining something to his brothers, gesturing with his dough-covered hands. Caleb was decorating a cupcake with total concentration, his tongue sticking out, his eyes focused. Lucas was savoring chocolate shavings, making comments about the taste. And Amanda was coordinating it all with an impressive naturalness, correcting here, praising there, laughing at their blunders, turning that kitchen into a space of genuine joy. Daniel stood in the doorway, just watching. Something inside him broke and rebuilt itself at the same time. That image was so similar to his own childhood memories, to the afternoons in his mother's kitchen, with Sarah learning recipes, with everything that defined that family. But it was also something new, something being built right there in that moment, by these people who had chosen to stay together. The tears came without warning. They weren't just tears of sadness for his sister who was gone. They were tears of gratitude, of recognition, of love for this woman who could have run from the responsibility, but chose to embrace it completely. They were tears of hope seeing these 3 boys who had almost lost the will to live now covered in flour and smiling like children should. Amanda was the first to see him. She turned, surprised, and put a hand to her chest. "Daniel, what are you doing here?" He tried to answer, but his voice wouldn't come out. The boys ran to him, showing him what they were doing, pulling him into the kitchen, explaining every detail of the recipe. Peter said it was a surprise that they were making cake for dinner. Caleb proudly showed off his decoration. Lucas simply hugged his uncle's leg and stayed there, clinging to him. Daniel looked at Amanda over the children's heads. Her eyes were also teary, but she was smiling. A tired, happy, real smile. No words were exchanged, but everything was said in that look. Thank you for not giving up on us. Thank you for turning this house into a home. Thank you for loving not just me, but all of us. That night, after the cakes were done, after they had dinner together, after the boys went to bed exhausted and happy, Daniel and Amanda stood on the porch, the same place where he had first said he would take care of the boys. She rested her head on his shoulder and he held her hand. Life wouldn't be perfect. There would be difficult days, crises, challenges. The boys would still have moments of deep sadness, the kind that never completely goes away. But there, on that porch, with the smell of cake still lingering in the house, Daniel knew with certainty that they had found a way, a sweet path, built with patience, love, and a lot of flour. The seasons changed, and with them, the dynamic of that house also transformed. What was once improvisation and survival began to take on the shape of a genuine routine, the kind built on affectionate repetition and small rituals that define a family. Daniel no longer woke up with a heavy heart every morning, though there were still days when Sarah's absence hurt like a fresh wound. Amanda discovered herself as a mother without having given birth, learning firsthand that love doesn't need biology to exist, only the will to be present. The triplets, now 6 years old and about to turn 7, showed constant progress. Peter remained the natural leader, the one who organized games with complex rules, mediated conflicts between his brothers with a sense of justice impressive for his age, and demonstrated a maturity that sometimes startled the adults. He was the first to wake up, made his own bed without being asked, and helped his brothers get dressed when they were running late. There were days when Daniel watched him and saw reflections of his own childhood self, that precocious seriousness of someone who understood early on that life demands responsibility. But he also saw something he hadn't had, the ability to play, to laugh, to be a child even while being responsible. Caleb remained the hurricane of the house, always running through the hallways, always inventing impossible adventures, always testing the limits of what was allowed. He climbed where he shouldn't, touched what was forbidden, and asked inconvenient questions at the wrong time. But his energy, once destructive in the first months of adjustment when he broke things and screamed for no reason, was now channeled into pure creativity. Colorful drawings that covered entire pages, elaborate block constructions that defied physics, and made-up stories that made no sense but had everyone laughing until they cried. Lucas, the most sensitive of the three, had found his refuge and strength in words. He read constantly, devouring books above his age level, and wrote short texts and poems in notebooks he hid under his pillow. He asked profound questions about feelings, about memories, about what happens to the people we love when they're gone. Questions that left the adults speechless, forcing everyone to confront their own pain and find honest words, even when there were no easy answers. The bakery became an essential part of the children's routine. Every Saturday morning, without exception, the 5 of them went to the main location together. Claire always waited for them with clean aprons and pre-measured ingredients. Michael, slower now, but just as dedicated, taught his grandsons the same lessons he had taught his children: persistence, honesty, and the value of a job well done. The boys absorbed everything with renewed enthusiasm each week. It was during one of these Saturday mornings that Peter asked a question that changed something important. He was shaping cookies next to Claire when he stopped, looked at her and asked with that childlike frankness, "Grandma, did Mommy make these same cookies?" Claire froze for a second, but Amanda, who was nearby, approached and answered in a calm voice, "She did, Peter, and she was great at it, just like you are now." Peter processed the information, then continued, "She would like to see us here, wouldn't she?" It was Daniel who answered this time, kneeling to be at his nephew's eye level. "She would love it. And you know what else? She would be so proud to see the 3 of you learning all this, keeping alive what she loved so much." The boy nodded, seemingly satisfied, and went back to working the dough. But that conversation opened an important door. For the first time they talked about Sarah without the air becoming too heavy, without tears preventing the words. From that day on, Sarah was mentioned naturally in everyday conversations. Amanda created a special photo album where she put pictures of the boy's mother at different moments in her life. They would look through it together, and she would tell stories that Daniel had shared, keeping her memory alive in a healthy way. Without forcing it, but without hiding it, the boys learned that it was possible to miss someone and still move forward, that remembering didn't mean being stuck in the past. At school, the teachers noticed significant changes. Peter, who in the first months after the loss would isolate himself during recess, now led soccer teams and helped classmates with difficulties. Caleb, previously explosive and prone to tantrums, channeled his energy into artistic activities, often being praised for his creations. Lucas, the most concerning at first due to his tendency toward mutism, discovered a love for reading and writing, impressing his teacher with emotional essays and a rich vocabulary. Amanda made a point of being actively involved in their school life. She attended every meeting, helped with homework, organized special snacks for parties, and knew all of their friends by name. Daniel, whenever possible, also made his presence felt. Together, they proved that a family is built on presence and dedication. It was during a spring fair at the school that something special happened. Amanda had set up a bake sale booth for the bakery with the help of the boys and Claire in the days leading up to it. They spent a whole week planning, making lists, testing recipes, and packaging everything with care. Traditional treats, all. Made with the family recipes passed down through generations. Crispy peanut brittle, coconut macaroons, homemade fudge, cornbread with a hint of anise, creamy rice pudding, and sweet caramel corn in decorated bags. The booth was a huge success, with a line from the very beginning of the fair. People praised not only the taste, but also the care and love visible in every detail. The boys helped serve, wearing small aprons with the bakery's logo, proud to represent their family legacy. At one point, when the line had thinned a bit, a mother of another student approached Amanda. She was an elegant, well-dressed woman, the type who usually didn't chat much with other moms. She commented with a genuine smile that her sons were beautiful and extremely well-behaved, that it was rare to see such polite and helpful children these days. Amanda smiled and thanked her, but before she could explain the complex family situation, Peter spoke up and said naturally, "She is our mom. Our other mom went to heaven, but this one takes care of us every day." The child's simplicity and honesty left the woman speechless. Amanda felt her eyes well up but held back the tears. She knelt, hugged Peter tightly and whispered a thank you that came from the bottom of her soul. In that moment, she knew she had won not just a place in that family, but also the hearts of those children, not as a substitute, but as a legitimate and beloved presence. Daniel witnessed the scene from a distance. He was talking to Michael, but his eyes never left Amanda and the boys. His father noticed, patted his son on the shoulder and said, "You chose well, son. She's special." Daniel agreed with a nod, too emotional for words. That night, after the children were asleep, Daniel and Amanda talked about the incident. He confessed that he felt guilty for being happy, as if loving this new family configuration was a betrayal of Sarah's memory. Amanda held his hands and said something he would never forget. "Sarah wouldn't want you to be stuck in sadness. She loved you, she loved these children. The greatest tribute you can pay her is to ensure they are happy, that they grow up well, and that's what we're doing together." The following months brought greater stability. The business continued to thrive with the locations running smoothly and new projects emerging. Daniel managed to balance work and family more healthily, learning to delegate and trust his team. Amanda, who worked on social projects, managed to adapt some of them to a remote format, allowing for more flexibility with the children's routine. Claire and Michael, despite their advancing age, remained active and present. The loss of Sarah had aged them in visible ways, but having their grandsons around regularly brought renewal. They saw in those boys the continuation of their daughter, and that comforted them deeply. The triplets' 7th birthday was marked by a big party, the first truly joyful celebration since the tragedy. Amanda organized everything with obsessive care, wanting it to be perfect for each of them. She knew it would be an emotionally charged day, the first birthday without their biological parents, but she was determined to make it a celebration of love, not a reminder of absence. She spent weeks planning every detail. A themed decoration that would please all 3 different tastes: superheroes for Peter, dinosaurs for Caleb, and outer space for Lucas. She managed to blend everything harmoniously, creating an environment that was both cohesive and personalized. Sweets and savories from the bakery, of course, including each of their favorites, 3 different but same-sized cakes, so no one would feel left out. games to keep the children entertained without it turning into chaos, a bounce house, face painting, a treasure hunt, a slime-making workshop. They invited friends from school, distant cousins who had reappeared after months of absence, and dear neighbors who had followed the family's journey. Maria came with her own children, and old employees brought carefully chosen gifts. The house was packed with people, with laughter, with life pulsing in every corner. Claire and Michael arrived early, helped with the final preparations, and welcomed the guests with the hospitality that had always characterized the family. At the moment of happy birthday, when everyone sang for the three boys who blew out the candles together, Daniel realized something fundamental. For the first time in almost 2 years, he thought of Sarah and smiled before feeling pain. The longing remained. It always would. But it was no longer that open, constantly bleeding wound. It was a scar that hurt sometimes, especially on special dates, but it also carried love, gratitude, and good memories. That night, after everyone had left and the house returned to silence, the family of 5 gathered in the living room. The boys were exhausted but happy, talking about the presents they received, about their favorite games. Amanda made hot chocolate for everyone, a tradition she herself had started in the first difficult months. They sat on the couch, the 3 boys squeezed between the adults, covered by a large blanket. Lucas, always the most observant, commented that it had been his best birthday ever. Caleb enthusiastically agreed, already planning the next one. Peter was quiet for a moment, then said something that moved everyone. "I think Mommy and Daddy were here today too. They're always here when we're happy." No one disagreed. Daniel kissed his nephew's forehead, and Amanda pulled them all into a group hug. Claire, who had stayed to help clean up, watched from a distance with eyes full of happy tears. Michael beside her murmured, "Our girl left a beautiful legacy, didn't she?" Claire just nodded, unable to speak without breaking down. Time continued its relentless march. The seasons changed once more, each bringing its own challenges and joys. In the fall, the boys started extracurricular activities. Peter chose swimming, Caleb opted for drawing, classes, and Lucas joined a book club. Amanda juggled schedules but loved seeing each of them develop their own interests. In the winter, Daniel had to take an unavoidable international trip, his first prolonged absence since taking in the boys. He was apprehensive, but Amanda assured him they would be fine. During the week he was away, she kept everything running perfectly, with Claire's help when needed. They video chatted every day, the boys telling him about school, showing him their drawings and blowing kisses through the screen. When Daniel returned, he was welcomed like a hero. The 3 of them threw themselves at him at the airport gate, clinging to his legs, asking for the promised gifts, all talking at once. He looked at Amanda over their heads, and what he saw filled him with certainty. This woman was the foundation that held everything up, the glue that bound this reassembled family together. In the spring, something unexpected happened that tested everyone's resilience. Lucas got sick, a bout of pneumonia that required a few days in the hospital. The initial panic was immense, painful memories of the previous loss rushing back with force, but Amanda remained calm, organized everything, and stayed at the hospital with Lucas, while Daniel took care of the other 2 at home. Claire and Michael took turns bringing food, offering support, and being a comforting presence. Peter and Caleb dealt with their fear in their own ways. Peter became quieter, more serious, wanting constant updates on his brother. Caleb reacted with anxiety, having nightmares, needing more cuddles. Daniel talked openly with them about their feelings, explained the difference between a treatable illness and what had happened to their parents, and assured them that Lucas would be fine. When Lucas was discharged and came home, the reception was emotional. Peter had organized a welcome home banner with his uncle's help. Caleb had decorated the room with colorful drawings. The whole house was adorned with balloons and loving messages. Lucas, still weak but visibly better, cried with joy at being welcomed with so much love. That episode, despite the scare, strengthened their family bonds even more. They all realized how much they loved each other, how much they depended on one another, and how that family, despite being non-traditional, was real and solid. Summer brought school vacation and more time together. Amanda proposed a trip to the beach, something they hadn't done since before the tragedy. Daniel hesitated at first, but eventually agreed. They needed to create new, happy memories, and there was no better place than the Jersey Shore on a sunny January. They rented a simple house on the shore, close enough to New York not to be exhausting, far enough to feel like a refuge. They brought Claire and Michael along, a decision that made the elderly couple's hearts overflow with gratitude. For 10 days, they were just a family on vacation. They built sandcastles, swam in the warm water, ate more ice cream than they should have, played cards at night and told stories under the stars. It was on this trip that Daniel and Amanda had an important conversation. One night, when the boys were asleep and his parents were resting in the other suite, they walked along the deserted beach. The full moon illuminated everything with that silvery light that seems unreal. Amanda stopped, looked at the sea, took a deep breath and said, "I want to legally adopt the boys." Daniel turned to her, surprised but not completely. Amanda continued, still looking at the horizon. "I know you're their legal guardian, that everything is already settled legally. But I want my name on those documents too. I want them to know, officially, that I chose to be their mother, that it's not just a circumstance or kindness, it's true love and a definitive commitment." His words came out heavy with emotion. "Are you sure? It's a commitment forever, even if we have problems, even if things get difficult between us." Amanda finally faced him, and her eyes were shining. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Those boys are my sons, Daniel, in the realest, deepest way possible. I want to make it official." They kissed there on the empty beach under the witness of the moon. The next day they told the boys about their decision. The reaction was pure joy. Caleb jumped into Amanda's arms, repeating that now she would be a real mom. Peter, more reserved, just hugged her tightly and said he already thought she was. Lucas, ever the precocious poet, commented that love didn't need a piece of paper, but it was nice to have one anyway. Back in New York, they began the legal process. It would be a long road, but it didn't matter. What mattered was the intention, the commitment made public. Claire and Michael were moved by the news, seeing in that gesture the confirmation that their grandsons were truly safe and loved. Life went on, each day bringing small victories and daily challenges. Arguments over homework, negotiations over screen time, conversations about friendships and minor school conflicts. The blessed normality of those who have the privilege of worrying about trivialities because the essential issues are resolved. There is food on the table, a roof over their heads, and love in abundance. And there was also always the sweet smell of vanilla and caramelized sugar, because the bakery remained the heart of everything, the place where past and present met, where memories were honored and new stories were written, one batch at a time. 2 years had passed since that night on the Jersey Shore, and the family's world had completely transformed. Amanda's adoption was finalized in a simple but profoundly meaningful ceremony. The boys, now almost 9, were present when the judge signed the final documents. Peter held Amanda's hand tightly, Caleb couldn't stop smiling for a second, and Lucas, true to his emotional nature, cried with joy. Daniel, standing beside them all, felt an immense weight lift from his shoulders. Not that he ever doubted Amanda's love or commitment, but there was something liberating in knowing that, in the eyes of the law and the world, those boys had 2 present, available, and committed parents. The bakery was thriving beyond all expectations. There were now 12 locations spread across New York City and the metropolitan area, each maintaining the family essence despite the corporate scale. Daniel had implemented a system where longtime employees, those who had been there from the beginning, received profit sharing and opportunities for growth. Maria, the shy young woman from Honduras who was the first hire, now managed 3 locations and trained new coordinators. Her story of perseverance and loyalty was told as an inspiration to the entire team. Claire and Michael, despite their advanced age, remained active. No longer on the front lines of production, but as symbolic figures and guardians of tradition. They visited the locations regularly, talked with employees, tasted new recipes, and ensured that nothing they had built with so much sweat was lost in the expansion. Their grandsons were their greatest joy, and not a week went by that they didn't spend at least 2 days together. It was on a Saturday morning during their well-established routine at the bakery that something special began to take shape. The triplets arrived more excited than usual, carrying backpacks with notebooks and colored pencils. Amanda noticed their excitement and asked what they were up to. Peter, always the spokesman, explained that they had a secret project and needed her help, as well as Uncle Daniel's and their grandparents. Intrigued, the adults agreed to participate. The boys then revealed that they wanted to create a family recipe book, not just any book, but one that told the story behind each dish, that explained where those flavors came from, who created them, and what memories they carried. They wanted to interview everyone, write down the exact recipes, photograph the processes, and create something that could be kept forever. The idea deeply touched each of them. Claire was immediately moved, remembering her own grandmother who had taught her first sweets. Michael pulled up a chair, ready to tell every story he held dear. Amanda took out her phone to take pictures. Daniel watched it all with a mix of pride and melancholy, thinking how much Sarah would have loved this project. For weeks, Saturdays at the bakery gained an additional purpose that energized everyone. Between batches of cookies, between serving customers and taking calls from suppliers, the boys interviewed, took meticulous notes and drew with impressive dedication. Caleb revealed himself to be a talented illustrator, creating colorful drawings for each recipe that went far beyond simple childish scribbles. He drew the ingredients with surprising realism, created decorative borders, and illustrated the main steps with an attention to detail that impressed everyone. Peter organized everything methodically, as he always did with everything in life. He created a detailed index, separated the recipes into logical categories: cakes, pies, cookies, fine pastries, frozen desserts, and special holiday recipes. He numbered pages, made cross-references when one recipe mentioned ingredients from another, and created a system that would make any professional librarian envious. Lucas wrote the stories with a sensitivity that impressed not only the family, but also his teachers at school. He didn't just mechanically transcribe recipes. He captured the essence of each dish, the associated memories, the feelings involved. He wrote about how that chocolate cake was his mother's favorite as a child, how that gourmet fudge was created on a sleepless night when his grandmother was trying to comfort his grandfather after a difficult day. He turned recipes into narratives, ingredients into characters, and techniques into emotional plots. Amanda realized that this project was more than a recipe book. It was a way for the boys to connect with the mother they had lost, with the story that was almost interrupted, but that they were helping to continue. Every recipe their grandmother taught came with stories about Sarah as a child, as a teenager, as a mother. The boys absorbed everything, building a more complete picture of who she was. One of those afternoons, Lucas asked a question that caught everyone off guard. "Aunt Amanda, can you put a recipe in the book too? Something that's just yours for us to remember?" Amanda hesitated, feeling all eyes on her. It was Claire who encouraged her. "Of course you can, dear. You're as much a part of this story as any of us." So Amanda told them about a cake her own grandmother used to make, a simple recipe for cornbread with anise that she hadn't made in years. The boys immediately asked to make it together. That afternoon, the bakery kitchen filled with a different aroma, a memory from Amanda's childhood mingling with the memories of that place. When the cake was ready and everyone tasted it, there was a silent consensus. It was delicious, and it would definitely go in the book. The project took months to complete. In the process, other people were included. Maria contributed a recipe from her time in her home country. Old employees shared variations they had created over the years. Even Philip, the boy's father who had passed away with Sarah, had his story included, through a gourmet fudge recipe he used to make for his son's birthday parties. When they finally finished, after months of dedicated work, the result was impressive in a way no one had fully anticipated. A thick, hand-bound notebook with a hardcover decorated by Caleb using collage and watercolor techniques, showing a bountiful table surrounded by a family holding hands. Texts written by Lucas in a careful script that improved with each page, revealing his growth in the process. Meticulous organization by Peter, with a cross-referenced index, colorful bookmarks, and explanatory footnotes. Photographs by Amanda that documented every step, every ingredient, every final result. Recipes dictated by Claire with the patience of someone who knows she is preserving more than culinary instructions, but a form of love materialized in measurements and techniques. Stories told by Michael about the early days, about special customers, about seemingly impossible achievements. Emotional contributions from the entire family and team, each contributing their memories, their variations, their guarded culinary secrets. It was more than a recipe book. It was a materialized legacy, a tangible history, a document that proved the family had survived the storm and emerged stronger. They decided to have an official presentation on a special Sunday. They closed the bakery to customers and organized an event just for family, close employees and dear friends. They set up long tables, prepared all the recipes from the book, and decorated the space with old and recent photos. It was a celebration of everything they had built together. The most emotional moment was when the three boys got up on a small, improvised stage to present the book. Peter began by explaining the project, why they had decided to do it. Caleb showed some of the illustrations, telling funny details about the creative process. And Lucas read a text he had written especially for that night. With a voice still childish but surprisingly firm, he spoke about family, about how it's not just about blood, but about the daily choices to be present. Each word was laden with a wisdom that shouldn't belong to someone so young, but that was the result of having matured too quickly, of having faced losses no child should ever face. He spoke about the mother and father who were gone, but who lived on in every tested recipe, in every gesture of affection in the kitchen, in every lesson about perseverance and love. He described memories he had of them, small moments he treasured, his mother singing while mixing batter, his father tasting each creation and giving exaggerated compliments just to see her smile. He spoke about his grandparents who taught him that success is built on honesty and hard work, that there are no shortcuts to excellence, that respect is earned through consistency. He mentioned their story, how they started from nothing and built an empire based solely on talent and dedication, without ever compromising their values or deceiving a single customer. He spoke about his uncle who gave up conveniences, who turned down promotions that would require constant travel, who restructured his entire life to raise three boys who were not his by biological obligation, but were his by true love and conscious choice. And he spoke about Amanda, lingering on this part with special affection, the woman who could have continued her quiet life, who had her own dreams and plans, but chose to embrace the chaos, the challenge, the indescribable wonder of being a mother to three messy and complicated boys at once, who never tried to erase memories or take places that didn't belong to her, but simply created a new, unique space of her own, where love didn't compete but multiplied. When he finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Claire was crying openly, supported by Michael, who was also discreetly wiping away tears. Daniel had his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. Amanda was behind the boys, and when Lucas finished speaking, she hugged all three of them, squeezing as if she wanted to merge their hearts into one. The party went on late into the night. They ate until they couldn't anymore, tasted every recipe, told stories, laughed, cried, and celebrated. It was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. The recipe book represented more than food. It represented continuity, healing, and transformation. In the following weeks, copies of the book were made for each family member. Claire kept the original guarded like a treasure. Amanda placed a copy in her kitchen at home, using it regularly. Daniel took a copy to his office, flipping through it in moments of stress or longing. And the boys had their own copies, already stained from use because they were constantly making the recipes. Life, as it always does, continued to bring new developments. Peter developed an interest in chemistry, fascinated by the science behind baking. Caleb discovered a passion for photography, always with a camera in hand capturing moments. Lucas continued to write, filling notebooks with poems, short stories, and deep reflections. Daniel and Amanda, solidified as a couple and as parents, began to think about expanding their family biologically, not out of a need to replace anything or fill voids, but simply because they felt they had love to spare. They talked openly with the triplets about it, assuring them that nothing would change in the love they felt for them. The boys reacted with enthusiasm, especially Caleb, who was already planning to be the responsible older brother. Claire and Michael, though tired, remained steadfast, driven by the love for their growing family. They knew their time was finite, but they cherished every moment, every hug, every shared laugh. On an ordinary Tuesday night with nothing special planned, the family was gathered in the living room. The boys were doing homework, Amanda was grading papers for a social project, and Daniel was reviewing documents. The television played softly in the background, more as ambient noise than entertainment. The scene was utterly common, even trivial. But it was in this triviality that Daniel had an epiphany. He looked around, saw the people he loved simply existing together, without drama, without crisis, just being, and he realized that this blessed normality was the greatest achievement of all. Not the business success, not the public recognition, not the awards the bakery had accumulated. The greatest triumph was having transformed tragedy into a new beginning, having built a home where love was a verb, an action, a daily choice. Amanda noticed his gaze and smiled questioningly. He just shook his head, returning the smile. He didn't need to explain. After so many years together, some things didn't need words. The years continued to pass, bringing natural changes. The boys grew up, entering adolescence with all the challenges that entailed. There were fights, disagreements, slammed doors, and shed tears. But there were also achievements, celebrations, and a deep bond. Peter became a serious and dedicated young man with plans to study chemical engineering, dreaming of uniting science and baking in innovative ways. Caleb, the free spirit, wanted to be a professional photographer, to document stories like theirs, to show the world that beauty exists even in imperfect narratives. Lucas followed his literary calling, writing constantly, publishing short stories in school magazines, dreaming of one day writing a book about his own family. The bakery continued to grow, but always with its essence preserved. Each new location that opened had a photo of the original family on the wall, reminding employees and customers where it all began. The recipes remained the same, prepared with the same ingredients, carrying the same meanings. Claire and Michael, now very elderly, slowed down but never completely stopped, until the last of their days, when their strength finally gave. Out naturally after long and full lives, they were involved with what they loved. They passed away within weeks of each other, as if they couldn't exist apart after a lifetime together. They left a huge void, but also a solid legacy, impossible to erase. The triplets, now mature teenagers, honored their grandparents by keeping all the traditions alive. The recipe book gained new pages, new chapters, new stories. The family expanded, friends became relatives, employees became part of the clan. And on an ordinary afternoon, decades after that first batch of cakes was made by a woman with skilled hands in a simple house, Daniel was at the main bakery when he saw a scene that made him stop. There was Peter, now a college graduate, teaching applied chemistry in baking to new employees. There was Caleb, photographing every step of a new recipe for the company's social media. And over there was Lucas, writing the story of that new creation for the website. Beside them were their own children, the new generation that would continue that story. And Amanda, still beautiful, still dedicated, moved among them all, guiding, suggesting, loving. Daniel felt his chest tighten, but it was a good tightness, the kind that signifies deep gratitude. He thought of Sarah, as he always did, but now without the gut-wrenching pain of before. He thought of her with affection, with a gentle longing, with the certainty that she would be proud of the sons she raised in their first years, proud of the brother who honored her memory, proud of the sister-in-law who became a true mother, proud of this family that insisted on moving forward without forgetting where it came from. The smell of vanilla and caramelized sugar filled everything, as it always had, as it always would. Because that aroma wasn't just of food, it was of home, of history, of a love that crosses generations, that survives loss, that reinvents itself as many times as necessary. And there, surrounded by these people who were his family, not by a twist of fate but by a conscious choice made every single day, Daniel finally understood the most important lesson life had to teach. Family isn't the one you start with. it's the one you choose to continue. It's this love that is planted, watered, and cultivated. It's this presence that is sustained even when everything conspires against it. It's this courage to start over, using the broken pieces to build something new, equally beautiful and infinitely valuable. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Daniel, Amanda, Peter, Caleb, and Lucas has touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of love, resilience, and family, please click the like button, subscribe to our channel, and tell us in the comments what part of this narrative resonated with you the most. Every day, we bring you intense stories like this one, revealing the deepest side of the human soul, showing that even in the greatest tragedies we can find sweet and meaningful new beginnings. We'll see you in the next episode with another story that will make you believe in the power of love and family.